The first and last time Idaho held a presidential caucus, a Republican presidential caucus, in March was back in 2012. A little more than 44,000 took part, and Mitt Romney ran away with it, receiving more than 61% of the vote. Compare that to 4 years earlier when the state held a presidential primary in May, that would be 2008, and more than 125,000 Republicans had a say in overwhelmingly picking John McCain. Well, that 2012 caucus went so poorly, the Idaho Republican Party decided to not do it again. That is until next year, all because a law passed through the State House earlier this year and slipped by everyone involved, which eliminated the option for the state to hold a presidential primary. Well, that just wouldn't do for the Idaho GOP, who, under new leadership, Chairwoman Dorothy Moon, was adamant about wanting to be relevant in picking a president in 2024. So coming up on March 2nd, Idaho is calling back the presidential caucus. And lately, there's been some discussion and finger pointing about who will participate in that closed caucus. In fact, there's even been a bit of confusion considering the decision that came down last week regarding the enforcement of the party's primary participation rules. Questions about the many different deadlines and who can set those deadlines, which is why Joe Paris joins me now. So, Joe, frame this out for us. Explain who can do what and when.
All right, let's start with an election calendar here, Brian. We're all going to keep track of several dates here, so keep an eye on this. We'll show it to you larger in a second. But when we look at the election stage, there are three to point out for you. First, the GOP caucus. That is coming up on March 2nd, 2024. And that election is for registered and affiliated Republicans to solely vote on the GOP nominee for president. The winner will take Idaho's votes to the National GOP Convention. That is all they will vote on March 2nd. Then on May 21st, that is the primary election across Idaho. And these are the inter-party races, Dems versus Dems, Republicans versus Republicans, Libertarians versus Libertarians. The winners go to the general election in November. A few days after the primary, the Idaho Democrats will have their presidential caucus, similar to the GOP's, but theirs is on May 23rd. Same deal. Democrats will vote for the party nomination for president. The winner there will take the votes to the Democratic National Convention. So the caucuses are run by the parties. The primary is run by the state. That is a key distinction here. And there is some confusion out there about the distinction. So the Idaho GOP has said that if you want to vote in their caucus, you need to affiliate as a Republican before the end of the year. So by December 31st. That date is accurate, correct, and legal. Now, some have pointed to a letter that was sent last week from the Idaho Secretary of State to the Idaho GOP. In it, Secretary of State Phil McGrain explains that he cannot enforce that rule and stop people from registering as Republicans on January 1st. It isn't in his authority, but the GOP, they can have whatever rules for their caucus.
The caucuses are run by the political parties. They're not run by the state. And so each of the political parties is allowed to adopt its own rules. Those rules also must fit within their national parties. And I know as we watch like the Democratic Party adjusting its rules, there's a decent chance they'll have different rules for the state primary than they have for their caucus, similar to how the Republican Party has already adopted new rules for their caucus that are different than what we'll be running for the state primary.
Okay, so you may be wondering if people can still register as Republicans after December 31st, how will this work? Well, the Idaho GOP will request a copy of all affiliated Republicans as of December 31st, 2023. Then they can use that information to control who votes in their party caucuses in March. And the parties, again, they're in complete control of the caucus. If there's a ballot counting or security question, for example, the state, they're not a party to any of this. It's not their election. So moving gears, the primary on May 21st is run by the state of Idaho. So March 15th is the last day to change political party affiliation or become unaffiliated before the primary election. And Idaho GOP Chair Dorothy Moon asked to have that primary affiliation deadline also be the end of this year. But Secretary of State McGrain explained to Moon last week that the March 15th date that cannot be adjusted without a change in the law. And all of this concerns a relatively small group of people. We're talking about unaffiliated voters for this.
This doesn't affect most people. The vast majority of Idahoans are already affiliated with a political party. And so the only people that this actually impacts are people who are existing party members who want to change party affiliation. Say something's happened in the news, the trends in politics, and a Democrat wants to become a Republican or a Republican wants to become a Democrat. That's who's really impacted by this. And it's important to recognize that the party has the right to have those rules. And then it will be, as we move forward, preparing for the state primary on May 21st, that March 15th deadline will be for all voters who are going to participate in those legislative races and a lot of the local stuff that happens here in the state of Idaho.
Okay, so I said we're talking about a relatively small amount of people unaffiliated. 70% of voters in Idaho are affiliated, so we're talking about 30%. So the Idaho GOP clarified all of this in an email to their membership today, Brian, similar to what they had sent out on Friday. They say, quote, the deadline to vote and register to affiliate to be a Republican in the March 2nd Idaho Republican Presidential Caucus is December 31st. And Brian, that is correct. I also reached out to Chair Moon to ask her about this and other things. I'm told she is traveling, but she will have a video out tomorrow on the topic, we are told. So I guess we will see then.
Oh, another video. Those always go so well. All right, thank you very much, Joe, for explaining all that for us. Well, if you're